Morning, everyone. Welcome to today's National Teen Book Club broadcast. I'm Sophie and Savitri is co-hosting today. Thank you so much for joining our final session for Cuts Both Ways. This broadcast will last around 45 minutes and we're starting with a quick intro to our guest speaker. It's our Meet the Author finale, so joining us is, of course, Candice Brathwaite. Candice is an author, journalist, TV presenter, and speaker with a huge online following. She started posting online in 2015 to tell her own motherhood story. Keen to show that young Black families weren't just surviving but thriving, her straight-talking, original content struck a chord with fans and brands. Candice is a self-confessed beauty and fashion obsessive and has worked with ITV and Grazia magazine, as well as many more organisations and brands. And she's written non-fiction books, as well as a fiction YA novel, Our Hero Read, Cuts Both Ways, which has inspired our NTBC sessions.
Yeah, we've been discussing books that also explore love, race, identity, family, loss, and we've touched on the contemporary versus classic love story debate with Cuts Both Ways and our curriculum link, Romeo and Juliet by William Shakespeare. Both stories explore star-crossed lovers and the ripple effects of knife crime. Love is never just black and white is the pitch line for Cuts Both Ways, and I guess you could argue it's also relevant to Romeo and Juliet.
Yeah, and we'll be discussing the book spoiler-free or as spoiler-free as we can. So if you haven't read it yet, you'll get a glimpse into the story. But we'll also be discussing Candice's career insights and advice. And as always, you can shape the discussion yourself with your questions. So please do submit them by scanning the QR code on screen or by typing in the code that you see on screen there online at slido.com. You can also submit questions by typing them into the Q&A function underneath the stream where you're watching this stream now. If you're experiencing any issues with the stream, please do let us know via the Q&A too, and we'll try and help you. So thank you so much, Candice, for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, guys. Thanks for that really great intro. Hi, everyone.
I'm sure they're all saying hi back. We've got a mix of book clubbers, so some who will have read your book, some who are just starting reading it, some who haven't read it yet. So please will you tell us a bit more about Cuts Both Ways, a pitch or blurb for the book?
How a picture or blurb. So we've got Cynthia, who was taken away from her very inner city life, where in the book where she was born and raised is Brixton, South London, which is where I was born and raised. And due to her older brother being unfortunately murdered, her family cart her off to the quote unquote countryside and put her in a really snobby private school where she meets an absolutely gorgeous boy called Isaac, and their love story really frames the whole book. And also what I really wanted to do with Isaac and Cynthia is constantly have the reader thinking, tussling with their moral line. Who should I love? Who should I support? And why? Every chapter, I wanted there to be a bit of back and forth in the reader's mind. And I'm going to shut up now because I don't want to give anything away. But I do think it's the kind of book that you put down and you're like, I don't know if I liked that. And I love a book like that. I love stories that I love killing characters. It's my favorite thing to do. We're lucky to get to the end of Cuts Both Ways and have anyone alive. I love just like in the middle of a book ripping someone out of the frame. But also I love putting a book down and just constantly thinking about how the ending could possibly be different. Not always, getting the ending we imagined. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
So interesting you say that, because I was thinking about that line from the back of the book, love isn't just black and white, which is obviously to some extent a kind of, I don't mean to play on words, do I? But there's a thing about the shift from childhood where things are quite simple and straightforward and you've got your goodies and your baddies. And part of the thing with becoming a teenager is whether it's because of race or because, as you've also touched on, their class or any other number of reasons, it's such a period of time of finding all the shades of grey. Yes. And trying to work out who you are, what's going to be your identity, whether you you know, go with your peers who
Yeah.
might be different from you in many ways, or follow your parents' path, which is such an interesting part in the book. We've had both Haringey Sixth Form College and Mossbourne Portside Academy ask, what inspired you? Where did you get your inspiration for the story and the characters?
So in my first ever book, which is actually non-fiction, it's a book about Black British motherhood called I'm Not Your Baby Mother. There was a chapter in there called Young, Gifted and Stabbed. And that's a play on a very famous song, Young, Gifted and Black. And I really, at the time of writing I'm Not Your Baby Mother, it was 2017. I just moved out of Croydon. Now, for those that don't know, Croydon is now listed as like the knife crime capital of Greater London. The most underage knife crime incidents now happen in Croydon. And I was pregnant with my son at the time, and I was just obsessed with gang culture, what it was doing to certain communities, how especially young boys of all races, but of a very certain class, were being led astray and pulled into gangs. And it was in my opinion, the most powerful chapter of that first book. And even though I went on to write other books, it never left me. I was like, should I get the chance? I want to be able to discuss knife crime with younger people. And I think the best way to do that is through fiction, to discuss not just, and I think for those of us who perhaps haven't been impacted by it directly, I think we see something on our social media feed, or we see a headline and you think about it for 5 minutes, but because it's not your reality, it then disappears. I think the easiest way to really seep this into the minds of our young people is to put it in fiction, and for them to possibly feel like, my gosh, what is the after effect? After the flowers have dried up and someone's had a funeral and hopefully the perpetrator's gone to prison, what are the remnants of us killing each other? What happens after that? And that was like my passion point for Cuts Both Ways. I really wanted to write a fiction story that hopefully would change the path of young people's lives in real life.
Thank you for sharing that. And it is a really powerful story, and I'm sure it's impacted lots of the book clubbers on the call. For anyone who is reading Shakespeare, they're studying that. How did you find Shakespeare, specifically Romeo and Juliet? Did you study it at school? Did you watch the play?
I think I did study it at school. I definitely watched the movie, the Baz Luhrmann movie, which I love. But I love to be honest on these calls. I hated Shakespeare so much. I was like, dude, get to the point. It was just so like long and drawn out and dreary. And it felt like you had to deconstruct every single sentence to really understand what was going on. So I was not like a historical context reader. Like, I wasn't really a fan of Shakespeare. I was more a fan of books like, I think there was a book I read in school called Lovely Bones. That book made me really decide I wanted to be a writer, because the impact that book had on me mentally at the time, and now thinking about it again, I will reread it this year. I was like, okay, I find reading more modern literature easier. And I sometimes do think that William Shakespeare could perhaps be a barrier to a lot of young people reading, or they may think they don't enjoy reading because they do have to pore over his text for quite a while. That aside, Romeo and Juliet is still the most amazing love story. And of course, I think in every love story, every great love story, there is a similarity in the pain and the conflict that happens between Cynthia and Isaac, and of course their families. But I think more to the point, and I've only really realized this in the last couple of months, I was definitely pouring some of myself into that book because I have a Romeo and Juliet type setup. My dad was from Jamaica, my mum was from Barbados. And they are two Caribbean cultures that for a long time really didn't like each other. And when my grandparents found out that my mum was pregnant with me by a Jamaican man, it was like the biggest fallout of 1987. They were just like, are you crazy? And now, actually, I'm a Caribbean woman married to a West African man. That too has had its moments. There's a lot of culture clash. There's a lot of misunderstanding that is not happening between the two lovers, of course, because they do love each other. But it's very much the outside influences being like, this shouldn't happen. So I do think Romeo and Juliet was definitely a reference point for how I shaped Isaac and Cynthia's journey.
So interesting, isn't it? Because there's such a difference between Shakespeare's plots, which we're always talking about. There's a timelessness to those, as you said, the themes of knife crime, and we won't go down the whole of talking about adolescence that I think we already touched on. But it's obviously such a current, unfortunately, conversation in schools, the after effects of rage and violence, and Shakespeare's language, which obviously for some people really resonates, and there's some beautiful lines, but it absolutely isn't going to be the way that young people talk now, or that, to be frank, most of us talk now. I'd be interested, actually, just to since we've got to that, about the language in your writing. How do you keep that? How do you keep your young people sounding real?
So I have the privilege of being a stepmom to an almost 17-year-old. That keeps me hip. That so much of the cuts both ways process, I was like, listen, honey, these are the words that I think are cool. You need to go through each of these, scrub them off the list, replace them with what the current lingo is. Because as cool as I feel, and like I'm almost 40, that's not my world anymore. And I think even a Netflix show like Adolescence has shown us all that with every 6 months, there's a new way that young people speak to each other. So I wanted it to remain as current as possible, but also timeless. Like the words being just, bridging that gap. So if someone reads the book in 10 years, it doesn't feel like it's aged out. But having young people in my house, so almost 17, another one, my daughter is almost 12, and my son just turned 7. I'm surrounded by younger lingo, younger communication, the way they speak to each other, and not just the way they speak, the way they even show dominance. Sometimes it's not even with language, it's with body language. And that was one of the key ways that I locked in, as the young people say, with Cuts Both Ways. Also, I like to think that I stay on top of youth culture. My TikTok algorithm, I do code it for it to think I'm like 21. I'm just like, yeah, what are the young people doing? What are they listening to? There was a lot of to really do my best with Cuts Both Ways. I sat through over 200 hours of YouTube footage in relation to gang culture and knife crime. When I say I obsessed over it to the point that I was in therapy at the time, and my therapist was like, you might want to pull back, because now you're just always seeing the world in a negative light, or you're very fearful, or you think, your children are always under threat. But I really wanted to get into the psyche of these young people's minds. And, I went to school with people who are now doing life sentences, unfortunately. And I definitely had some crushes who are now no longer with us because, they unfortunately were stabbed to death. But someone said something that always sticks with me. They said, the funeral hits different if you're on the front row. And that's so true. Like, I've been to many funerals, but fortunately, I've never been on the front row. I haven't been, my younger brother's still alive. My son is still with me. All the men in my life that I love are still with me. And so I really had to immerse myself in quite negative thought patterns in order to get this as correct as I believed I could.
Thank you. Well, you've spoken about some of the research there that's gone into kind of writing the story. Anonymously, it's come in. Hi, Candice, big fan of yours. I wanted to ask, do you have a specific process for how you go from an idea in your head to a story on the page? And I'm going to link that to another question from Mossbourne Portside Academy, who asked, how do you write? So do you have a routine or like some sort of process you always try and follow?
Shocker, guys, but I want to keep it real. There is no process. There is no timetable or timeline. I'm sure we might speak about this later on in the conversation, but writing isn't my only job. And when I look at it from like an income perspective, writing may make up for 20% of my income. So not a huge amount at all. And so that does, you know, that does kind of rule how I spend my day. My last book, which is adult nonfiction manifesto, 90% of that book was written on the notes app on my iPhone, in the back of cars on the way to other jobs. I am so sick and tired of this idea that someone has to quit their job, move to the countryside, and write for 10 hours a day in order to be classified as a writer. That is supremely unrealistic for at least 95% of working authors today. We are typically writing around other jobs or writing around other responsibilities. So my routine is just get it done. When I'm really in the flow, when I'm in the middle of writing a manuscript, I'll stay up till 5 a.m. I'll do like a 10 p.m. till 5 a.m. shift. I'm the best when the house is completely asleep and there's no one to bother me. But some people, they may like a stricter time in the day. They may write from 8 till 1, take a lunch break, walk the dog, but that's just not my vibe. So to wrap it up, I have no vibe. I have no rules. I'm just like, I let my editor tell me when the deadline is, and then I let her know I'm probably going to be a month late, and then we just take it from there.
I'm just going to say thank you so much for all these excellent questions coming through. Please do keep them coming. So many directions we could take the conversation in next. I'm going to ask, since you touched there on kind of the organization or the lack thereof, maybe, how do you manage your large social media following as well as rigorous book writing? And do you promote your book on those platforms? That's from Thurfield School.
Oh, so yeah, what's really interesting, guys, is I only ever really started social media in order to get a book deal. So prior to being the writer, I was a marketing assistant at a publishing company called Penguin. I'm sure we all know Penguin. And it was through being a marketing assistant, I was like, this isn't really the job I want to do. I want to be the author. How do I do that? And this was in 2013, 2014, when we were just seeing the rise of, we call them an influencer now, but we called them a blogger back then. We were seeing the rise of the blogger. And even though, you know, so many times I was told that I was a really great writer, the constant pushback was your social media following is not big enough. Go and grow your social pages, and we might entertain the idea of giving you a book deal. Number one, I do not think that's correct. I think that's absolutely insane. And if we can think back to a time before social media, imagine the litany of writers we would have missed out on because they didn't have huge social media platforms. It's completely unfair. But I was like, you know, I like a challenge. I was like, okay, you want me to grow a platform? I'll go and do that. It took many years, 6 years, in fact. It was not an overnight success at all, but I was finally in a position to leverage my social media channels and then use that to get a book deal. It's very infuriating, but it's just the kind of unfortunate pattern that publishing find themselves in, because they want writers with large social media platforms, so they feel as though they don't need to do much on the marketing front. If you have a large platform, you can plug your book to 1 million+ people, and hopefully that puts a large dent in book sales. It doesn't always work that way. But yeah, so now I do typically use my social media channels to promote my work. And fortunately for me, my social media channels are now at a place where they manage themselves. I don't have can you guys tell I'm very chaotic? I don't have a content schedule. If I just feel like recording a video now and hitting upload, that's what I'll do. And if I'm not inspired for 3 days or 2 weeks, then I just don't post. I do understand that there are some people new to the social media space and they feel like they need to post 3 times a day in order. I don't care anymore. But that's just because I'm an older lady. 10 years ago, I really cared, and I was really like, more followers, more people, more eyes. And now I'm like, no, this is enough. Like, my worst nightmare is going viral. I will just I will cut the cord on my Wi-Fi router if I go viral. I can't think of anything worse. Just to wake up tomorrow and have like millions and millions of new eyes, most worryingly, millions of opinions of people you don't know. We are actually now in a space where we're living life in a very scary way. None of us humans were not made to take on the opinions of, let alone hundreds of people a day. there are some young people who go viral every other week, and they are trying to, you know, cleanse through the opinions of millions of people. I can only imagine how damaging and scary that must feel.
So interesting, because as you started talking there about that 6 years of having to build a social media following, and we'll come to the person in a sec who's asked how long the actual book took to write, but you know, that at a time when I know you're a parent yourself, lots of people are wanting to spend less time on social media, or wanting their loved ones to sort of spend less time on social media and kind of protect themselves from some of that noise. Albert at Fairfield School has actually asked, do you have you ever had any problems with fame from your book?
Oh, any problems? No, never from the books. Well, actually, that's a lie. I think I'm now estranged from my mother, so that means I don't speak to my mum. I've not spoken to her in about 7 years, and my dad's been dead over 20. And I remember after publishing I'm Not Your Baby Mother, she did kind of try and sue me, which was kind of already circumvented because there was moments in the book that also discussed her. Luckily, my publishers had already sent her a contract saying, this is being discussed. If you want to take it out, now's your opportunity. She'd already signed off saying it was all cool. So there was no bad could come of it. But I would say any issues I've had from my storytelling are definitely more personal. Not necessarily from a stranger who's just picked it up and, you know, they want to cause an issue. It's definitely been family members who are like, oh, for lack of a better word, guys, because I'm trying to pretty up, they're just a bit jealous. I just think it's like, she said she was going to be a writer. We didn't actually believe her. Now she is. We're not really happy that she's discussing her life from her perspective, because that's the only way I can write, because it perhaps puts us in a light that isn't always positive. I can appreciate that may upset some people, but that's the only kind of issues I've had.
Thank you, Candice. We appreciate you being so open about your experiences. We had a question come through from St. John Bosco Arts College about books. So what books did you read as a teen?
Oh God, what did I read? I read a fabulous book called The Coldest Winter Ever by an African-American author called Sister Soldier. This book was so viral, and it's funny to even use that word because we just had access to the internet, like dial-up had just become a thing. But her book went on to sell 14 million copies in an age before the internet, which I don't think people... Selling books is a really hard job, guys. 14 million before the internet. So word of mouth was working overtime. And I remember my local WH Smith just couldn't keep copies in quick enough because all of the local schools, so I went to a secondary school in South London called St. Martin's in the Fields, and all of the local schools, you know, actually they banned it in most schools because I reread it last year, and my God, it is extremely salacious and terribly grown up. But because the main character, Winter Santiago, is 14, we all just fell for it hook, line, and sinker. And also being in an area where the demographic was densely Black and female, we had never read a story where we could see ourselves in the character. So bookshops just couldn't keep it in store. And to see the language, even though, you know, African-American dialogue is slightly different, it just felt like reading a piece of home. So I remember that book, that it's just such a standout book to me. Anything by Mallory Blackman. I remember Mallory coming to do a talk at one of my schools. And then 3 years ago, I was able to interview her at the South Bank for her latest book. That felt crazy. What else did I read? Of course, Lovely Bones. And that was a magical, life-changing read. But those are the only ones I can remember off the top of my head. I don't know why this book has come to me now, though, because I can't even remember what it was about. But I read a book called, is it Vernon God Little? Is it Vernon God Little?
Yeah, I've not read it, but that is the title of a book.
Yeah, and I'm just like, for some reason, that's a really standout book in my mind. But when I was younger, in WH Smith, they had this teeny tiny rack of basically Black authors. I mean, like, this rack was slimmer than me. And those books would just get gobbled up because that was seemingly all the literature I had to kind of see myself as the main character, or, you know, open a book and really understand the family dynamics or the culture that was being expressed in the context. And so I remember just living and breathing for the new releases that would come in. I remember a book called Fly Girl by Omar Tyree. Oh yeah, they had some hits.
We've got some really great questions, because I can already hear from what you're saying there how that sort of desire to see yourself represented in work is going to have influenced what you're writing. We have some questions about that. But since you mentioned interviewing Mallory Blackman, I'm going to come back to a question Castle Manor Academy have been very patiently waiting for us to ask. They asked it really early on. What has been a highlight of your career so far? You can have more than one.
What has been a highlight of my career? I was employed I call it home, even though I was born in the UK. 90% of my time is spent in Barbados, and that is where my maternal lineage is from. I filmed a Black History Month special for the Lorraine Show. A lot of you guys are at school and college, so you might not know what the Lorraine Show is, but it's a breakfast show that comes on ITV. And they flew me out first class to Barbados to do like a deep dive on my family's history. Insane. Still one of the most amazing work highlights to date, for sure. Even though this isn't like a highlight someone would understand, one of my biggest highlights is being in control of my own time. I come from a lineage where women, my grandmothers and my aunties, they all had dreams, and for whatever reason they just couldn't live those dreams out. Someone wanted to be a nurse, they ended up being a cleaner. Someone's a really great dressmaker, you know, that they've ended up doing something completely different. To be living my dream is the consistent career highlight. To be like, after I get off the call with you guys, I'm currently training for London Marathon, I'm going out for a 2-hour walk. To be able to have that kind of flexibility over my day, especially as a Black woman who is the first on both sides of her family lineage to make rules about how her day goes, that for me is like the peak of the mountain. There is no award, there is no one I can interview, maybe Oprah, but there's no one I can interview that is going to like match how I feel accomplished in that way.
Thank you. And you spoke there about kind of balancing your commitments. We had a question from the field about how you balance, you know, your writing and your other work with your family commitments. What kind of advice do you have for the young people who are thinking ahead and balancing commitments and deadlines in their careers and in school?
Do you know what? Thinking a lot further down the line, guys, because you guys are so young and free, as you should be, but your life partner really matters. It's such a make or break decision. If you desire to start a family, and this can be, you know, for male or female, if you desire to start a family, who you decide to do that with really matters. You need to be honest, and now I'm speaking specifically to girls. You need to be honest about your heart's desires, and you need to make decisions really early on about what you're not going to compromise. When I met my husband, I was like, listen, one day I want to run a multi-billion-pound media empire. I have no idea how I'm going to do it, but I can suspect it's going to take years of hard work, lots of long nights. Are you going to be able to like pick up the night shift? Are you essentially at some points maybe going to be able to be the stay-at-home parent? Like, these were conversations we were having, and I know that feels weird, but you know when the time is right. And he was like, you know what? Not what I planned, but I got you. And he stuck to his word. And I think I'm only able to even think about the falsehood of balance because I'm doing life with someone who's willing to fall back. I'm doing life with someone who is actually willing to see life outside of gender norms and gender roles. 5 years ago, you know, he quit his job because we noticed that the work I was doing was out earning his job role times 5. it made no sense for him to be leaving the house at 6 a.m., coming home at 7 p.m., whilst I'm trying to do all of these things and do the school run and be at the parent teacher meeting. It just didn't make sense. But that did mean he had to have a conversation about what masculinity meant to him, about what being a man meant to him. And I've also had to have conversations about what being a woman means to me, because typically I'm not the one in the parent WhatsApp group. Guys, whenever I'm left to get my kids ready for school, I'm going to get it wrong. I send the kids in the wrong uniform all the time. And then my husband calls me like, Candice, it was PE day. A lot of our conversations, I think, people would assume would be rigged the other way, that the woman, the mother, always knows what's going on, and the guy's kind of confused and hapless. That just doesn't happen. So sorry for the really long explanation, but I do think it's really important, especially, again, speaking to girls, to keep your desires at the forefront of your mind. And who you decide, should you decide to have a life partner, you need to let them know from the jump, like, these are the things that that are never going to change. Are you willing to meet me halfway on that?
I think really interesting for everybody on the call, because, you know, of whatever gender, there's something in that about making decisions about the life you want and what that looks like, and not being told what it has to look like.
Yes.
It can be really difficult, you know, and you know, for various cultural or community reasons and society around us, those expectations can be so entrenched that it's really, hopefully, quite inspiring for some of these young people on the call, I know, will be making their own decisions about what life should look like, and sticking to that. So yeah, good luck with that, all of you. We wish you very well. Some interesting things in there, since we've kind of got onto gender roles and things a little bit, about representation and your characters. So let's start with this one from Martha in Thurfield. Do you feel like there's a character, one specific character in your book or other books, who you can relate to?
In my other books, because they're non-fiction and I'm typically talking about me, of course I can relate to me, but I can definitely relate to Cynthia. More to the point, though, I think Cynthia's psyche might be more the psyche of both my daughters. So my stepdaughter only moved into our house like a year ago. So she's coming from Brixton. She's coming from the hustle and bustle of South London to a home where I kid you not, guys, there is no bus anywhere. You cannot get a bus near my house. You have to walk 2 miles to the nearest bus stop. The corner shop is 1.5 miles away. She's in the middle of nowhere. And I remember when she first moved in, she said she really struggled with the silence. There's no sirens, there's no cars. You can't hear people laughing out on the street. And so much of her experience, I think, is rooted in Cynthia's experience more so than my own. But there are touches of me in Cynthia. If you've read the book and now you can see my face, there's definitely touches of me in Cynthia's mum, of course. And, you know, I was always trying to use that as a reference point. But speaking about representation, what was most important for me is that when the book was displayed in bookshops, that Black kids knew those were Black kids. I was very clear about that from the offset. I don't know if many people know this, especially as a first-time author, which when Cuts Both Ways came out, I was not. But as a first-time author, you do not get final sign-off on your front cover or the title of your book. Once you decide to sell the rights of your work to a publishing house, typically they have final say on what your book cover is going to look like and what the title could possibly be. I think that is insane. And so because I was now seen as a quote unquote successful author, I had far more liberty and creative space with Cuts Both Ways. And I was like, let me tell you something for free. I make the decision on that front cover, because I know how impactful it was for me at 13, 14, 15 to walk into WH Smith and know that was a Black girl on the front. There was no confusion. It wasn't ambiguous. I looked at that cover and I was like, oh my gosh, that's me. So this is for me, you know? And so we went back and forth about how beautiful Cynthia and Isaac had to look. And funnily enough, you just can't make this up. The woman that ended up being the illustrator ended up being a classmate that I spent my entire secondary school life with. And I remember just getting this email where she was like, Candice, do you remember me? Oh my gosh, your publishers have just contacted me. I can't, it just, and it gives me goosebumps, because she was like, I know exactly how these people need to look. They need to look like us and the boys we used to crush on, like, say no more. And to me, Cuts Both Ways, the cover is still the most stunning thing I've ever seen, because you can see Cynthia and Isaac in such detail. And I think when it comes down to representation, there is no question about where these children are from.
Thank you. And the illustrations are amazing on the front cover. Okay, we had a question from Jenny. Well, Jenny said she loved your book. Do you think books should have happy endings or some sort of hopefulness? I mean, Cynthia does have a hopeful ending at the end. We'll try and not.
Should books have happy endings? Nah. I'm speaking metaphorically, of course, but I'm definitely a killer at heart. Also, though, I can appreciate that my dad literally just dropped dead when I was 20. There was nothing wrong with him. He got the common cold, turned into the flu, and he died in 3 days. And so I'm really just rigged to understand life's harshness, or how quickly it can turn on you. You know, what is a normal day can become the most upsetting day of your life thus far. I'm very, very aware of that. And I do like to perhaps insert that into my fiction work, just to not just to ruffle feathers, but also to provide some light and shade to it all, because that unfortunately is life. And don't get me wrong, I think there is hope to be found even in stories that we feel end sadly. I still think there is hope there. I'm just not a easy breezy beach time read girl. I just love a book that leaves me sobbing. And so I haven't done it yet, because I've been forewarned, like, this is top tier sadness. But I really want to read, is it called A Little Life? But I've seen the TikTok, so I don't know if I'm emotionally ready just yet. But I think a book that can be that emotive is really important. And unfortunately, you can only really unlock that with a certain level of desperation and sadness.
Okay, so I'm going to confess this, just in case anyone on the call is thinking that just because you read a lot of books means you're necessarily, some brilliant intellectual in any way. I gave up on A Little Life. Many people recommended it to me. I don't even know if it was because it was too sad. I don't know if it was because it was too big a book. I don't know if it was because I'd read some very sad books at the time. I paused and I thought, I know some of my best friends telling me this is the best thing they've ever read and it changed their life. I'm just going to read the Wikipedia entry and get the gist of what happens next. Well, I'm not sorry I did that, actually, still. But just to clarify, by the way, Candice doesn't love Shakespeare. I love Shakespeare. Many people love A Little Life. I read the Wikipedia entry. So one of the things we're aiming to explain here is it's absolutely fine however you want to engage with your reading experiences. We've got some really good questions about the actual writing process, and I'm conscious we've got just sort of under 10 minutes to get through them, but I'm going to ask, because we kind of touched on this earlier, and I want people to have a realistic understanding. You've talked a lot there about your career and the practicalities and the hustle and the percentages that you make from writing versus from other work. So Fairfield School have asked, does writing provide good money?
It depends. I think we need to start with the concept of what is a good financial life. We need to start there. And to me, if I was solely reliant on what my books currently pay, absolutely not. I couldn't sustain the lifestyle I currently have solely writing. This doesn't mean that can't change. Also, once you've written a book, it can still change. You're given an advance, okay? A publisher likes your book and they're like, we're going to pay you £20,000 for the rights to that book. We will do all the hard slogging, the printing, the editing. And to be clear, for my first ever book, that was my book advance, £20,000. But you also have to out-earn that advance to then start making money. So your book sales need to accrue to £20,000, and then you will make a percentage of each book sold past that point. those books did really well. So I got a check just yesterday. I'm still making quite a good percentage. But in terms of the lifestyle I currently live, it's nowhere near enough in order to sustain that. But things can change again. My first book has done something called being optioned for TV. So it's currently sat with Sky, Netflix, BBC. We've been in a writer's room, which is where you turn a book into a TV story for 5 years. Okay. Taking a book from this to the screen, be it small or big screen, can take up, I think the longest I've heard is 17 years. But during that period of it being optioned, you get paid so Netflix, Sky, or the production company can hold on to the rights of turning that into TV. That's another way to make money. Now, if you happen to write an absolute smash like One Day, not only are you making lots of bank because you've now out-earned your advance, you're making lots of bank because it's consistently made for TV. I think we've had 3 one-day TV series over the last course of the 20 years, and each time that author gets paid for it. And not only does he get paid, the story gets reintroduced to new readers. People watch the show, they see it's connected to a book, boop, everyone rushes and buys the book. All of a sudden, One Day, almost 25 years after being written, is back on the Sunday Times bestseller chart. So there's just this huge wheel or way and web of how it can go. But like I said, typically for me, I think for Cuts Both Ways, my advance was like 45,000. So with each book, I've been able to go, no, more money, because these books have proved themselves to be a success time and time again. And I've now hit a space in my career where my next book that I'm currently working on, I will not sell it for less than £100,000. That's a big jump from the first advance being 20 grand to me now saying, I'm not putting one acrylic nail to this laptop for less than 6 figures. But that's because I have had to prove myself with the consistency of 5 books selling really well to be like, I feel like I'm worth the money. You know how quickly I out-earn my advance. Let's try and get it to this number. I hope everyone's just understood what I've said, because it's very boring and mind-boggling, but there are so many variants and so many different ways as to how you can make money from writing books.
Thank you. That's really helpful to hear all the practicalities. And yeah, they asked the questions that they wanted to know. So thank you for going into the detail there. Okay, I think we're probably moving on to our final question now. I just want to thank everyone for their amazing questions that have come through. Cuts both ways. So obviously we see Cynthia navigating a new environment. We've got Isaac, who feels like he can be himself around Cynthia. What advice do you have for book clubbers around navigating new circumstances themselves or their peers as well? How might they support other people and themselves in creating a successful career and environment?
Oh, wow. I would say if you're the person going into the new environment, always try not to mutate yourself too much to get validation from others. It always ends really, really badly. I actually didn't start to see success in my career until I decided to be my whole self. And, I wasn't copying who was a famous blogger at the time. Or when I just decided to be myself, life got so much easier. You have to believe that you are worthy of attracting your tribe wherever you go. Going into a new situation and trying to mimic the personality or the things that someone else is doing is just not going to end well. Let's try and avoid peer pressure at all costs. And for the people that are welcoming someone new into a space, just be as gracious and as kind as you can. And always remember when you were the first in a space and it was really nerve-wracking. And some of us have had the privilege of being in the same friendship circle from nursery up until sixth form. That's just how it works if you've never moved house. In my younger years, I moved home 11 times in 4 years. As soon as I thought, these are my people, this is my gang, it was like, no, new area, different school. I was constantly on my toes and I was always so desperate to fit in that I look back at those years and I kind of cringe because I'm like, oh, maybe you would have had a better time of it if you were just yourself. But also I found myself in situations with people where, you know, for lack of a better word, there was just a lot of bullying because it was like, she's new, she's different. We're not going to try and accept or understand her. We're just going to like cast her out and be a bit mean. Try not to be the bully. I have lost count of the amount of messages or emails I get from people who were really not kind to me at school. And they're just like, oh my gosh, we see you're doing so well now. And that annoys me because I'm like, are you only now apologizing because, quote unquote, I'm seemingly doing well, you know? Or would you have found the way to reach me if I wasn't in a public facing career and you just thought, you know what, maybe I made your life harder than it needs to be. Don't be 16, 17 now having to send that email when you're 40. It's not cute.
Thank you. That's really, really nice sort of piece of advice. Don't be the bully. Feels like a good thing we can ask ourselves. You know what? Am I being the bully right now? Like that's before we say or do anything or press send on anything. I'm just going to apologise to Cardinal Newman School because I think you asked what made Candice write the book, but I think she's covered that. But we didn't shout you out, and I'm conscious we've had loads of questions from Thurfield. I think we had some from a couple of other schools, but we definitely didn't shout out Cardinal Newman. So thank you to all of you for joining us. I'm so sorry for everybody who did have questions we didn't get to, because unfortunately that is all we've got time for today. Always so much more to ask Candice, but fortunately she is very present, very active. So you can find her, and there's plenty of interviews where she's giving her advice, and I'm sure there's things you'll be keeping an eye out for. So yeah, thank you so much, Candice. Such a wide-ranging series of examples and experiences to share with the young people. So yeah, it's been really, and we really enjoyed reading your book and sharing it with the group.
Thanks, guys. This has been awesome. Thank you for coming.
Thanks. Oh, thank you so much, Candice. And thank you everyone for joining us today. We really appreciate it. And a feedback form will be shared with you soon via email, and we'd love to hear your thoughts. We'll be in touch with the winners of our book bundles via email, so do keep an eye out in case your school has won books for your library. You might also like to join us from the 7th of May to the 25th of June for our next book club next term, for which our hero read is That Self-Same Metal by Brittany N. Williams. We'll be joined by her and 5 other authors to discuss fantasy, adventure and action books, historical fiction and Shakespeare again too, as Brittany's book explores Shakespeare's London with West African mythology. Really excited to read that one. Please do head to our website for more information and to register your groups. You can also find more broadcasts on the Speakers for Schools website. Thank you so much, everyone. We really, really loved having you at this book club, and we hope you enjoyed reading and joining us for the sessions. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, everyone. See you again.
Bye everyone.